We'll go ahead and call to order the Transportation Policy Committee meeting of January 24th. Mayor Dara could not be in attendance today, so I received a touch about 30 seconds ago to chair the committee meeting, so please bear with me as we work through the agenda today. I'd like to welcome everybody, and we'll start with introductions. And if we could, we'll start over here on the side of the room, please.
Maggie Moeller, KYTC District 5.
Bob Stein, United Consulting.
Mike Cheney, Local Metro. Adam Forsyth, Kipta.
Sean Dykes, HDR.
Owen Taylor, City of Fox Chase. Rocky Community, City of Fox Chase.
Megan Bennett, China Redford, Megan Farmer, Workman Engineer.
Spencer Robinson with Trimark.
Sarah Bear, Kipta. Danielle Story, Kipta. Elizabeth Park with Kipta.
Randy Salmon, Kipta.
David Burton. Nick Vale, Kipta.
Amanda Defford with Kipta. Ashley Tenias, Kipta.
Jim Udi, NDOT.
Matt McGay, Jeffersontown.
Andy Crouch, Jeffersonville.
Justin Tackett, Floyd County.
Brian Dixon, Clark County.
Keith Griffey, Bullitt County. Jeff O'Brien, Louisville Metro.
Curtis Hockenberry, Shepherdsville.
Alicia Harper, Bullitt County.
Arthur Jones, City of Shepherdsville.
Doug Byron, Chapin, Middletown.
Aida Sculpey, Todd.
Ronnie Bowling, City of St. Matthews.
Thomas Witt, KYTC Central Office.
Tom Hall, KYTC District 5. Kevin S., Owen County.
And I'm Kevin Beatty, Town of Clarksville, Indiana. So, hopefully everybody has had time to review the minutes. The information was sent out via email earlier this week. I need a motion to approve the minutes of the November 20th TPC meeting, please.
Move.
Do I have a second? All right, have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public comments. Do we have anybody from the public who would like to address the body? Seeing and hearing none. Public meeting report. Ashley?
On December 4th, we attended the One Southern Indiana Social Media Workshop in Jeffersonville. On December 12th, we went to the Age-Friendly Louisville Mobility and Access Work Group Committee. On December 14th, we were at the Kentucky Association of Government Communicators luncheon in Frankfort. On January 8th, we participated in the IAP2 monthly webinar on diversity and inclusion. On January 16th, we were in Frankfort again for the KAGC, and yesterday we were at the Regional Mobility Council meeting at TARC.
Thank you, Ashley. Any questions for Ashley? All right, federal certification review. David.
Thank you very much. As most of you know, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the 5 counties, plus a little bit of Harrison and Shelby County. And we our job is basically to make sure that you, the policy committee, receives the things that you think are important and that you want to see in terms of transportation for the 5 counties. That's our primary focus. But we are required to do it within the confines of the federal regulations. So we implement federal regulations on your behalf to make sure that you get what you want. So we had a federal certification review. We had a federal certification review in August of this past year, 2018. And at that first certification review, we have the MPO, which is the KIPTA staff and you and some of our planning partners. And they come to examine the planning process and make sure that we are doing what the federal regs ask us to do or tell us to do. There's one of 2 outcomes. We can be certified, which means we can continue with our planning process, or decertify, which means there would be the interruption of funding and a review of the MPO structure. How often do we do this? Every 4 years. And it's by the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, and the EPA. And basically they come in and they say, okay, are you guys doing what you need to be doing in order to fulfill the expectations of Congress and of our Transportation Policy Committee? Who is involved? Primarily they are looking at the Policy Committee. They are also looking at at NDOT, KYTC, and TARP, and our local planning partners to make sure that we are all working together to hit the highlights. So in November, after the review was completed, we got a letter from the Federal Highway Administration that says that the certification review found that KIPTA is doing a good job, that we are meeting the federal regs, and we are making sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that the policy committee gets what they believe to be important for our 5 counties. This is the agenda. So it took place over 2 days, and this is just to give you an idea of how full the agenda was and the level of detail we had to go into as we talked to our partners. There are 2 pieces to this. There's the desk audit, and during the desk audit, the Federal Highway and Federal Transit and the EPA administrations, they all look at our website and go through all of our planning documents to make sure that the documents that we've identified are good, meet the regs, and then that also gives them means to ask questions for the site visit that occurred on August 22nd to 23rd. And at the site visit, we had a tour of the area. What are some of the transportation highlights? We had lots of Q&A, and then we had discussion about the federal regulations and our planning process that led to the federal certification report. There's a lot of work that goes into getting ready for the certification review. Every staff person in this room was intimately involved in making sure that we would be in a good position to represent what we as a staff do to try to make sure to address your needs and wants as well as the regs. We also called upon our planning partners to help us to get ready for this. So we prepared to showcase and highlight the things that we think are really important and that we do a really good job on. Okay, there are 3 basic findings to a federal certification review: corrective actions, recommendations, and commendations. Now, the corrective actions are about the actual federal regs, because when we go through the review, the FTA, FHWA, and EPA, they go almost line by line through the federal regs. Are you doing X? Are you doing Y? And if they discover that we are not doing what we are supposed to be doing, we get a corrective action that says you need to make sure that you're doing X as you go forward. Recommendation. They look at our planning process, they compare it to other planning processes throughout the country, and they say, hey, you know what? You might want to consider tweaking this a little bit. Or you might want to consider adding something to your planning process. So they kind of give us some thoughts for us to consider, some ideas for us to think about. And then there's commendations. Commendations are the gold rings, because those are the things that they identify as being best practices. In other words, those are the things that we, including all of you, that we do in order to meet the federal regulations, and they think that they are really good, and they will share them with other planning agencies throughout the country. So there's 3 options for each of the main areas. No corrective actions. That's a big deal, because this was my 7th certification review, and we've never had 0 corrective actions. We've always had something. I think the least we ever had was 2, 1. Okay, so we're doing pretty good. We're down to 0 now. That's a really good thing. There were 3 recommendations, the 3 ideas that they wanted us to look at, things that we might want to consider improving. As part of our planning process, is we need to look at how well our transportation plan interacts with the environment. What types of mitigation steps do we need to look at? What they said is that we may want to do a better job with that, but they said that we also have a new planning tool that actually does that. So it was sort of a yin and yang. You might want to do this as you go forward, but we also know that you have this planning tool that's going to help you do that. So that was a good thing. The community assessment and outreach program needs to be updated. Well, yeah, we knew that, because the last time it was updated was in 2006. But that's intentional, because that's a very deep tool that we've utilized, but we've been able to incorporate a lot of what was already in there in this online planning portal that we put together over the last couple of years. So we don't have that document anymore, but we have the content of the document just in a different form. So we feel pretty good about that as well. The conformity MOA needs to be updated because it's 10 years old. Well, yeah, we agree. But as you may recall, the EPA and the air quality issues have been kind of confusing over the last couple of years. So our plan was to wait until that gets settled a little bit, so we have shared expectations amongst all the planning partners that we are addressing the appropriate Clean Air Act and coming up with a better or newer conformity MOA. And the conformity MOA is how we look at air quality, because we are required to contribute to improving air quality. And the MOA is between KIPTA, our planning partners, to say we will all work together and we will take these steps that are necessary to make sure we do our part. 8 gold rings, 8 commendations. That's a new high. So we've got a new low on the corrective actions and a new high on the commendations. That's pretty good. That's the most we've ever gotten. Performance management planning is a big thing now. So we have a performance management plan that's been put together by KIPTA staff. Amanda does a lot of the work on that right now. And they've said, you guys have done a really good job with that. Keep it up. Our online tool, the KIPTA Transportation Planning Portal, I'm hoping that most of you are used to that, are actually kind of tired of it by now because you've been using it so much with our NCP update. But that's been a group process. Adam and the GIS team have pretty much been working pretty hard to pull tons of information and data together to help us work better with you and to help give you the information you need in trying to make sure that that we're all singing from the same hymnal. TARC is pretty involved in our planning process, and we also work with them on the Dixie Highway BRT project that's currently underway, and they thought that the way that we've gone about that is a very good thing. There's a second page. The online application tool is something that Danielle and Elizabeth put together, and that helps, and you have used that quite a bit. Adam and his team have also made it so that it's interactive, so that as you go through the application tool, we can also provide you with the data that you need to actually complete that. And we feel really good about that. What we've also been able to do is bring in the red flag inventory that Sarah put together for us, and combine that with public comment that Ashley has worked on, so that when people go through our process, not only are they looking at data, but they're looking at comments. So we're able to do a very good thing of combining the very hard data with the very subjective public comment, so we can get a better picture of what's going on in the area. Freight clusters. We've become very data heavy. We've identified a lot of freight issues. Elizabeth is working on our regional freight study, trying to identify how we can improve freight movement in the area. Freight clusters that Adam and his team brought together help us to identify where a lot of the freight is going to or coming from. So that's been very helpful. The feds like that a lot. Sean's been working on that. This is the big one. This is Randy and Andy and a couple other folks. But we have to go through the interagency consultation process. It basically means when we deal with air quality issues, we've got to get EPA, Federal Highway, Federal Transit, our local planning partners, all to sit down together and say, okay, have we approached the way we have identified projects correctly in terms of their impact on air quality? And we've got a really good process, as seen by the EPA, that we have a great command of this consultation process, and they use our process as an example of how others should be doing it. performance management plans, or I'm sorry, project management plan is what this is about. And you guys have been working with that, and Nick's going to talk about it in just a few moments. But this is the process we brought to you in 2016 to help better organize and implement how funds are programmed and spent in our region. They like this process a lot, and they told us so. And then we go back to this online portal again, the transportation planning portal that has involved every person in this, every staff person in this room plus others to put together. We tried to make things available to you so that you can help us help you. Larry, quote Larry Cheney. So that's something that we're very proud of, and the planning portal is in its early stages, and we hope to continue to grow it and make it even more useful to you. The feds like that a lot. Okay, so we had 8 commendations, which is pretty good, and I think that's it's a good reflection upon you as you guide us, as you guide staff, and it's a good reflection upon staff as they try to implement what you think is important for our region. The next federal review will be in 2022, probably late summer, early fall. What's next for us is we're going to take a harder look at those 3 recommendations and make sure that we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, and we're good there. And then the full report will be available on the KIPTA website the next couple of days if you want to take a look at it, or I will auction one off to you right now. I have a stack of them right here. Would anybody, if anybody would like a copy, I'll leave them right here. You can pick them up now or after the meeting, whichever you prefer. That's it.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? Well, based on the certification review, I want to thank David and Larry and your staff for all the hard work you do. I can tell you that my staff at Clarksville calls on you frequently for information and does visit the transportation website. We've had new employees and had to train them on how to use it. So
good.
Thank you very much for everything you do, and I think I speak for the board that they do a very good job representing us at the federal level. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's see, no action required on that, is there? Okay. Quarterly project review. Nick.
Yes, thank you. All right, today I'm presenting the quarterly project review process, kind of going over what occurred in the last 3 months or so. Presentation is loading here in a second. The quarterly project review process kind of came out of this project management plan that David just mentioned. It was approved by you all back in September of 2016, lays out the rules for how KIPTA manages our dedicated federal transportation funds. So we receive funds directly. And TARC also receives their funds. KYTC and NDOT have their separate pots. But we have the small amount of money that a small pot of funds that we're allowed to prioritize projects for. And so every quarter, project sponsors submit a progress report kind of indicating how well things are going in terms of staying on schedule and within the funds that are currently programmed. Each quarter, project sponsors have the opportunity to submit a phase shift application, essentially say the utilities phase of Project X isn't moving forward in a timely manner. They may choose to push that off into the next year. There's also opportunities for cost increases, which I'll talk a little bit about today, as we did have some funds available in Indiana. There are rules that we've laid out that you guys have all approved in terms of managing costs. 20% is kind of the threshold for our cost increase requests. If anything goes above that, typically there's a special exemption letter or exception letter that's required from the project sponsor, and those are presented directly and approved by TPC. In terms of managing schedules, again, you can shift a phase up to 2 times. That 3rd time, there has to be an exception made by TPC. And then finally, there is opportunity, if need be, to move some funds within the 4 dedicated programs in Indiana and 2 dedicated programs in Kentucky. So we have a little flexibility to move some monies around if need be. So let's look at how things are working out in fiscal year 19 for Indiana dedicated funds. Again, on the left-hand side, you'll see the annual allocation, how much funds have been obligated to date, and how many funds are still unobligated. And basically, when funds are obligated, that means that project or that phase of that project can move forward and start billing towards expenditures. For the congestion mitigation air quality program, started off with about $1 million. We've obligated about $200,000, leaving $800,000. The highway safety improvement program, there's 3 or 4 projects that have that those funds are programmed to, and I think all of them are coming up very shortly on the letting schedule for NDOT. Surface transportation program, and that has actually changed. I need to update this. Feds are now calling it the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. Somewhat semantics, but they like to change the names periodically. We have obligated almost the entire annual allocation of funds, primarily because $2 million or so of that was awarded to the heavy haul road project that NDOT is managing. And then finally, Transportation Alternatives Program. Clarksville and Jeffersonville have a tag team project that they're doing on Montgomery and 9th Avenue that I think should be getting obligated fairly in the next probably months. So that's just kind of a snapshot of where things stand now in Indiana. Like I mentioned before, we did have funds available for cost increases for fiscal year 2020. So we followed our project management process, and we put the word out to all the Indiana LPAs. Cost increase applications were submitted. We received these 6 that you see here, and all of this is also in your meeting packet. We then got a project working group together of TTC members to evaluate those projects and then rank them. Those rankings were then aggregated and we provided an average ranking. So you can see across the top, we've got the local public agency, the KIPTA ID, the project that's being requested funds for, the specific phase that's being requested, the amount, and then you can see the project working group, PWG, average ranking there, and then their funding recommendation based on the request. So Blackstone Mill received, basically Blackstone Mill, Blackstone Mill, Road Phase 1. State Street corridor improvements, Market Street, Spring Street, Charlestown Road, all received full funding, and then the Mount Tabor Road received a portion of partial funding, basically whatever was left in the Surface Transportation Program pot. So that is the recommendation of the project working group. That recommendation was then recommended by TTCC 2 weeks ago. And so my request to you all at this time is to approve the one phase shift. There was a phase shift on in your packet, and I can answer questions if anyone has anything about that specific phase shift. So it's one phase shift, and these 5 cost increase requests is what I'm requesting action from you all.
So moved. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion or further questions for Nick? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
All right, and we'll move on to Kentucky here. Here's a quick look at how things currently stand in Kentucky. We started off the fiscal year with about $67 million in the Surface Transportation Program. We've only obligated about $400,000. I know a lot of folks have indicated that their phases are on schedule for this fiscal year. So I expect in the next quarter to see that number go way up on obligations. In terms of Transportation Alternatives Program, we have not yet obligated those funds, but the majority of them are pretty much ready to go, is my understanding. And for all of this information, we have provided the progress reports in your packet, so you can see whether they're on schedule, off schedule, behind schedule, and things of that nature. Big picture for our STP program, or Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, is that we need to obligate at least $19 million. That's about what we bring in every year. And if you all recall, we've had a large carryover balance, which is why we currently have $67 million programmed this fiscal year. And so we really need to obligate at least $19 million to avoid that balance growing. And then the TAP program, if we do not obligate at least $1.2 million, the we could lose funding. So that's where you see that, want to avoid that lapse. So we're keeping track of all this, and next quarter we'll bring this back to you all again. There are just a few proposed phase shifts. These are all fiscal year 18 phases that the project sponsor thought were going to make it in terms of getting obligated before the end of the fiscal year in September. And unfortunately, they did not make it, so they did have to request a phase shift to move those phases into the current fiscal year. So my request today for you all is to approve the 3 phase shifts in Kentucky.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments for Nick on this action item?
I do have a question. Who made the motion? Thank you.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nick. Item 7, group project categories. David, you're back up.
I'm back up. Yeah. Okay. In your packet, you'll find a memo from me, and then we'll do item 7, group categories. You're going to need to look at that as we go through this presentation, through this discussion today. So I want to make sure everybody has that available to them. With the new Metropolitan Transportation Plan connecting Kentuckiana, we're looking at trying to figure out ways that we can better manage and our planning process relative to projects, but also trying to look at ways that we can be better accountable for the performance-based transportation planning that's now required of us. In order to do that, staff has come up with a proposal for your consideration on how we deal with what are now called various projects. Right now, staff has done a lot of looking around. We have over 130 various project types in our Transportation Improvement Program and our Transportation Plan, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. A various category is, let's say, someone might say, a various project might be various sidewalks in Jefferson County, or various sidewalks in Bullitt County, or Oldham, or whatever. There's a whole multitude of these. What that enables the sponsor to do is to say, okay, I want to build a sidewalk on Oak Street between Maple and Elm. And it's a relatively small project, so we want to make sure that we get this into the Transportation Improvement Program so it can begin to receive federal funds and we can implement this project as quickly as possible. So the various project categories, of which there are, like I said, over 130, make that possible to happen. But the fact that there are so many now, it makes it difficult to manage in an effective and efficient manner. It makes it equally or even more difficult to account for those small projects that might affect the goals and objectives that have been identified by the Transportation Policy Committee and the performance targets that we are required to do by the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. So this various approach that we've been working under for quite some time is no longer working as it needs to. So, if the staff has decided to take a different look at this and come up with a more refined, more efficient process of doing this, we call them group projects. Now, right now, the various projects, anybody can introduce a various project, and there's nothing that says it can't go into the Transportation Improvement Program or the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And so that's what happens. We're having various project ideas thrown at the tip in the MTP pretty quickly, pretty regularly. So what we are going to ask that we do is we come up with a defined set of group projects to make it more easily understood, the whole process more easily understood, better organized, but most importantly, because we have shared expectations on what constitutes a project that can be administratively modified, better accountability in terms of making sure that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and we are more easily able to measure the impacts for the performance-based transportation planning that we are now required to do under the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. Pretty important components to all of this. And so I just want to make sure you understand the bottom part as we go forward, is that we are trying to make this an easier, more transparent process going forward. Now, the difference between an administrative modification and an amendment. The Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration allow us to make project changes in the Transportation Improvement Program that are what they consider to be minor, and that they do not impact air quality, or they are called exempt projects. So, if it's a large project that you want to administratively modify to the tip, you can't do it. If it's a project that impacts air quality, you want to try to administratively modify it, you can't do it, because it may impact air quality. So, what we have to find here is a process that is, okay, so you can either administratively modify or you can amend. Now, admin mods are the small, minor changes to a project, or introducing small projects that have no air quality impact. Amend is when you have what we call a non-exempt project, a project that impacts air quality. So that has to go through the full amendment process. Or we can also amend exempt projects. Now, let's take something off the table right now. We are not discussing non-exempt projects, because the amendment process for a non-exempt project can take up to 6 months, because there's a lot more work that we have to do. So we are not talking about that. What we are talking about are exempt projects only. And the usual time frame for addressing or amending an exempt project to the MTP or the TIP is 2, maybe 3 months. So everybody understands that. An admin mod takes about a month. An amendment of an exempt project to the MTP or the TIP is 2 to 3. We are not talking about non-exempt amendment that could take up to 6. Okay, so we got that clear. Okay, so in the packet under agenda item 7, you'll see that there are several categories that are going to be the same in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program. In our research that we've been doing over the last 12 months or more, trying to figure out how to best approach this, we have reviewed all of the various project categories that are in the current MTP and TIP, and these 8 categories address them all, cover them all. So nothing is left out when we talk about admin mods or things along those lines. Okay, so there are the 8 right there. If you look at your group category thing on item 7 in your packet, you're going to see that there's a title, and the first one happens to be air quality improvement. So it's a group category title, followed by examples. And examples are just guidance. They're supposed to help you better understand what we're talking about when we talk about air quality improvement type project. So, you know, they are not an exhaustive list of the types of projects that could be administratively modified through this process. They are not criteria for project selection. They're just to give you an example, an idea, and they are not limited to this list that's on here. If we tried to capture every item that was on that could fit under there, we'd have a list as long as my arm. And we're getting back to that same situation we had before, where we have too much information floating around. Good examples of right here. Go down to the next step. And it says, and this one, for projects and programs to be considered, the air quality improvement from project programs must. So this is the qualifying criteria. We have examples and we have criteria. All of this criteria was established through detailed review by KIPTA staff in trying to identify what are the things that are important and what are the things that will help a project be advancing into the group project categories. So we have federal regulations, performance-based transportation plans, a big one. Good planning practice is always a good one. And again, we were guided by the research that we did in trying to identify what are the thresholds that need to be utilized when we talk about group projects. Okay, so we went to the Transportation Technical Coordinating Committee on January 9th, and they have a couple of proposed changes for your consideration. Under the roadway and bridge preservation and rehabilitation group category found on page 3 of that memo item, we have a cost not to exceed of $10 million. That's a staff proposal. Transportation Technical Coordinating Committee is proposing that we increase that from $10 million to $15 million for the road and bridge preservation and rehabilitation group category. That's one consideration for you guys. Again, staff is proposing the 10. We think that's reasonable based upon the research that we conducted, that we have identified a good threshold. I think Amanda, what was the average on that?
The average project in the last 3 years in the road and bridge rehab category was $926,000.
Okay, so staff proposed $10 million because there was one in there that was $6.6 million.
The maximum cost in the last 3 years was $6.6 million.
The other proposed change by the Transportation Technical Coordinating Committee had to do with the transit improvement section. And if you look on page 5, the top of page 5, under the examples, it was proposed that we change the onboard transit amenities to onboard and offboard transit amenities. That was one proposal. And then the other one was to add a new example. Technology and software improvements to improve communication, ADA accessibility, or data collection. So those are the examples that were proposed by the Technical Committee for the Transit Improvement Group category. Again, we just want to reiterate that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list of examples on any of these group categories. It's just to give you an idea, to get you kind of primed thinking what we're talking about. So there are examples that are, and it can include many more that we just don't have room or time to capture. So, lastly, the Transportation Technical Coordinating Committee recommended to the Transportation Policy Committee, you guys, that you approve the group project categories with the changes that they proposed. And they are in yellow. So what we are asking, what staff is asking of the Transportation Policy Committee is the approval of the group project categories and their associated criteria and project selection as presented by KIPA staff. Thank you.
Do we want to act upon these as a group, individually, as a recommendation?
Well, first of all, what we're proposing is what we took to TTCC. In addition to that, you have the recommendations that TTCC made. Okay. So the motion should address that. Whether this body wants to approve the document as originally presented, or whether you want to approve it with those additions.
May I just ask a question before we make a motion? David, why did TTCC want to increase the cost threshold for the roadway and bridge?
There was quite a bit of discussion on that particular group category on the preservation of bridges and roads. There was some concern by the cabinet that was introduced that there may become instances where maintenance and bridge improvements may exceed that $10 million threshold that we put in there. We've been trying to balance the responsibility between giving the policy committee the opportunity to have input and the public the opportunity to have input, with balancing the need of the improvement. Like Amanda just mentioned, most of them are around 900,000 plus range,
And
up to 6.6 million.
So, and this is I'm remembering the federal policy, right? This is a relatively new thing that's eligible for we're talking about SLO funding, correct?
We're talking about all funding.
All funding, okay. So this is a relatively new allowance into the STPU program with federal funding, right? The rehab projects.
Anything could be funded with STP block grant funds.
Yeah, the rehab projects actually came, I guess, into focus really during the RO Recovery Act, where they started to allow rehab rather than full reconstruction.
It is important to point out that all we're talking about is the introduction of new projects to the TIP.
Right.
That the admin mod process that's you've been used to for over the years will continue as it exists now.
So our projects that we're seeing out of this pot of funding is averaging around $1 million, and we're concerned that the 10 million threshold is. And again, this is like, so if somebody in the group had a bridge rehab that was $12 million, it doesn't preclude us from asking for a specific bridge rehab project of $12 million. But this is, I know Metro has various sidewalks repair categories, so it's what would prevent us from having a various bridge repair of over $10 million. Is that right?
This would not prevent you from doing that because we are dealing with exempt projects. Okay. And you would have to go through the amendment process, which would take about another month, maybe 2 more months, maximum 3 on getting that through the process.
The birth of administrative modifications was something minor, a change, whether a cost increase, scope was not, a scope change did not fall into that category. Dramatic cost increases didn't fall into the category. And it's morphed through the years, and a lot of MPOs treat it different ways. But we wanted to try to put some kind of definitive structure around it where, and that's why we looked at project history to see what a typical exempt project that could fall into these categories might be. And that's where we established the guidelines and the cost thresholds. But it's, like David said, we're trying to weigh between our obligation to you and our obligation to the public and a process that will allow projects to move along in a reasonable fashion.
We rounded up very liberally in all of these categories.
Will these, just for my own understanding, as far as the dedicated STP goes, those projects still have to be approved by the committee, is that correct? Yes. So even if one of those projects was eligible for an administrative modification, that doesn't mean that an agency that wanted that project could just go ahead and ask staff to add it. You know, it would still have to. So I think for the cabinet, it's more useful for the statewide funds. You know, the money that's available on a statewide basis, where it's not constrained to this area. I think, you know, for us that'll be the biggest benefit of having these group projects categories. And you know, like David mentioned, it's basically replacing the various projects process that was used in the past, and I think it's a major improvement on that, really, because it was kind of cumbersome the way that it was before, because each LPA had to sponsor a various projects category, and then keeping track of all that, it was pretty tough. And
most LPAs didn't have one. So if you had a $200,000 project, you still had to amend it because there wasn't a various category to cover your project. Now this is going to be all-encompassing. It's not going to represent any specific LPA. It's just a project type. So it opens it up to anyone who might have one.
If I could say too, we've due to the time frame where we've had to look at this, and due to it having occurred over the holidays, we just now in the past few weeks have gotten comments from some of our agencies within the cabinet, and the main, I guess one thing that they had requested was for the safety improvements category. They requested a few changes, and I think there are at least a couple that are worthy of consideration. For example, right underneath safety improvements, under that heading, the person's projects and programs in the safety improvement group are intended to reduce crashes.
What page are you
on? I'm sorry, I'm on page 4. Anyway, it says that these projects are intended to reduce crashes on all public roadways. And one point that the HSIP staff had made was that it should also include reducing the risk factors for crashes. So, for example, installing guardrail, that wouldn't necessarily reduce crashes. It probably would not reduce crashes, but it would reduce the factor it would reduce the risk factor from those crashes. So I know that seems like a very technical change, but I do think that's important to recognize. So they had just suggested that right after to reduce crashes, that you insert the words and/or reduce the risk factors for crashes. And the same thing underneath, under the paragraph that says for projects and programs to be considered, the first bullet point also makes reference to reducing crashes, and that's actually a must statement. So I think in that case, it's also important to add a statement that says and/or reducing the risk factors for crashes. They also had suggested including under that last bullet point where it says the projects are encouraged to address certain things, they had suggested adding a bullet point to support the Kentucky Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And I know you don't want to get into listing a whole lot of things just for the sake of not having too much paper, but I think that one is actually important because the federal regulations do require that we consider that in the transportation planning process, so that would be a good way to demonstrate that we're doing that.
Could you explain again where that one is?
That one, it's also on page 4. It's under, if you look at the last bullet point, it says are encouraged to.
Yes.
It would just be added to the bottom of that. And I do apologize for bringing all these details at this stage, but again, we haven't, with the holidays, we just didn't have time to really look at this in detail before the technical committee meeting. I think Tom had actually suggested having a working group to hash out the details, but I understand, and I think that's a good idea, but I understand that with the time constraints that you all have got for getting the new MTP in place, that that may not be practical.
Could you give me the language again for that?
For that last
bullet point.
Yes, support the Kentucky Strategic Highway Safety Plan.
I might point out that if we do that, we also have to include the Indiana
Good point.
plan.
Right, that's a good point. So support the Kentucky and Indiana Strategic Highway Safety Plans.
Would you not think that safety improvements support those plans
I would think they would.
by default?
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, it's just there's a federal regulation that the planning documents, the TIP and the MTP, have to incorporate the strategic highway safety plans either directly or by reference. And
they are.
If they already do,
yes, they do.
Then maybe we don't need to worry about it here.
That's something that we were trying to compress this a little bit too. That's why we had examples rather than an exhaustive list.
All right. Well, if it's already addressed somewhere else in the document, then it may not be necessary to include it here. And I have to mention this because I know that the cabinet has concerns about including thresholds at all. And, I understand the perspective of the MPO and, wanting to make sure that we don't put very large, significant projects in the TIP and the MTP without providing for adequate public review. And I think that's a valid concern. And I think placing dollar limits on these group projects category is a way to address that. But I know they're, upper management in the cabinet, they're concerned about the possibility that no matter what we make the threshold, that there could be a project that comes up that would exceed that threshold, and then we've got to go through the amendment process and possibly delay projects. And sometimes we're not as organized as we should be, and we're running around at the last minute trying to obligate funds before they lapse. And if we had a project that we could obligate money on, but it wasn't in the TIP yet, and we had to wait for a 3-month amendment, that could potentially result in projects money for projects having to be spent elsewhere. That's one concern that I wanted to bring up about including the cost thresholds. Now, I personally don't think it'll be a major problem as long as the thresholds are reasonable. But that's something that I think that the committee should understand, that there is that risk. Tom, you mentioned to me that, as far as LPA projects go, CMAQ, for example, the statewide TAP projects. I know local agencies can apply for that money through the state. And if you're awarded projects, again, sometimes they're kind of scrambling to get that money obligated because there's so many processes that they have to go through in central office before they can finally get that money approved. And I think, Tom, you were concerned that if you did have a project that crossed the threshold for some reason, that it could.
All right, we just want local governments to be aware that if you have a project that exceeds a threshold, a project like a CMAQ project or a TAP project and is in excess of $1 million, typically out of the gate, when you're awarded that money, you want that agreement, and so you can get started on that project. Bigger projects above these thresholds, add 6 months to that time it takes to get an MOA. It's very possible that that's going to happen. And that's been a transparent procedure in the past because the Office of Local Programs would take care of the programming under administrative modifications. We think that larger LPA projects are going to get a 6-month delay on their start times.
Well, first of all, if it's an exempt project, it can be 3 months.
It's up to 3 months.
First of all, up to 3 months. Could be less than 3. The other thing is, if we're trying to look at the significance of a project. Yes, these are arbitrary numbers, but as David said earlier, they are rounded up from a typical project in the region. We're trying to be accommodating to those types of projects, and we have been, I think, pretty lenient with those numbers. What we're trying to capture are just that type of project, the type of project that's an anomaly. Something is causing that project to cost more than all the other ones that are grouped with it. It's either impacting the community more, it's costing a little bit more. Something's different about that project that would make us look at it a little bit harder and make it an amendment rather than administrative modification. That's the whole basis of this process.
And I'm going to correct you on one thing. They weren't arbitrary numbers. They were carefully researched and evaluated and studied and everything else.
But any threshold you choose can be considered arbitrary.
Can I ask for clarification on something? I thought I heard you say this earlier, then I think you just repeated it. These are exemplary but not exhaustive lists.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. That's correct.
So we're discussing adding language and verbiage to this list that are only examples and they're not confining in any way.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, the threshold is not an example.
Yeah.
The threshold, the dollar threshold, is a limit. So
understood.
Yeah, but the project, and it specifically says, but not limited to. These are examples, but are not limited to.
And I think, our concern, we don't really have concerns about that. For those, our HSIP staff did suggest some more examples of safety improvements, but like you say, it's exemplary, so those would be included anyway.
Well, all of those that they suggested are included in the Federal Highway Administration countermeasures, which we mentioned as one of the criteria.
Okay.
And reduce the risk of the crash factors. I think that would be a good addition personally, because that is above and beyond addressing crashes.
Right.
It's preventing crashes.
David, on that reducing crashes, should it be further elaborated to address fatal or injury crashes, or do you feel the word crash will capture everything?
I think the word crash captures just about anything. I mean, all crashes are a hair's breadth away from being worse. So I think a crash is a good way to capture it.
Yeah, and by saying that we're reducing the risk factors for crashes, that kind of implies that we're reducing the risk of a crash going from being a property damage only to an injury or a fatality. I did have, like I say, I know the cabinet's perspective is that they prefer not to have any limits at all. And, we do this in other MPOs and haven't had an issue with it because these types of projects, to get into these categories, generally speaking, they're not going to be that expensive. The primary exception might be with your bridge and pavement rehab projects, and you've put a pretty generous limit on that, I think, now that's been revised upward to $15 million. But you know, if the committee does want to include limits, after we've gotten feedback from our Office of Local Programs, which handles the CMAC and the TAP programs, and the HSIP group, we think that better limits would be $3 million for HSIP, because that would enable them to also include corridor-wide improvements. And then according to Jackie Jones with the Office of Local Programs, she's saying that her projects typically are over $1 million now, so she feels like $2 million would be more appropriate.
Well, which category?
That would be for the
Transportation and
well, there's several actually, but air quality improvements, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and transportation enhancements.
Well, bike and ped, we had an average over the last 3 years of $400,000 on administrative mods.
What about your maximum?
Our maximum was $788.
Okay, and that's for the total project cost?
Yes, and then for the safety, our average was $362,000 with a maximum of $1 million. Mm-hmm. And then what was the other one? Enhancements. Our average enhancement was $372,000 with a maximum of $684,000. And then what was the other one you had?
And I don't know specifically which project she's thinking of, but I just wanted to pass that on. I will say with safety, and to me safety is kind of a critical one. Tom, you mentioned to me that there was a project at Taylorsville Road,
right.
At Breckenridge.
Taylorsville Road and Hurstbourne Lane,
Mm-hmm.
HSIP intersection improvement project. The construction cost was $1 million, but the design cost on top of that would make it over the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
That's a project we wanted to bring to the committee's attention because it's simple safety improvements within state right of way. We were a little concerned that we would just have to wait 6 months and,
6 months is not included in this. If it's an exempt, air quality exempt project, the most we're looking at to get through our process is 3 months. Typically, it's 1 to 2. It's usually not 3. So the 6 month concern is not an issue or at play with this process.
Assuming an amendment starts the day we introduce the project.
No. The amendment starts when we say we're going to do an exempt only amendment. We will inform you like we normally do. You will provide us with the information, and then we will go forward. So that's why we give it 1 to 3 months, because the time that you inform us might not be the same time that we start the amendment process. But once we get it going, it goes pretty quickly.
If you needed to. Otherwise, we'll wait and gather up projects for a major amendment. But if there is a project that has to be processed immediately, and we'd like to think that there's planning ahead of that we don't get in those circumstances where it matters a month or two, that we can plan a little bit further ahead and not have these planning emergencies that are causing all this aggravation with administrative modifications or not.
Sometimes the state gets in a position at the end of the federal fiscal year where there's money sitting around to spend, but it has to be spent quickly on simpler projects, and it has if we set up a perceived barrier to being able to spend money in the region, the state may choose to spend that money elsewhere. And I would encourage us to limit the number of barriers or perceived barriers we might put in the way of bringing money into the local area.
Well, we as staff do not consider it a barrier. Honestly, I mean, it's going to serve more as a conduit than it is a barrier. Actually, it's not precluding that project from occurring. It's just taking it a different route. If it's atypical, because of the reasons that we've already laid out, that we've got responsibility to the public, to the planning process, to this committee, to vet these projects and to say something's different about this one, we need to look at it harder. So you need to choose where that line is. It's a line. It's not a barrier. It's a line. And this is the start. Now, this is not something that we cannot revisit in the future if it does start to do that. If it does start to be a barrier, then we'll step back and reconsider and look at maybe different thresholds.
This is just another way for us to get a project into the MGP, though, correct? I mean, this is not the only path. I mean, if you do a project, or I want to rehab the Liberty Street Bridge, I can choose a separate project or apply for CMAQ or whatever, or I can choose to have a group project to rehab a bunch of bridges and include that one as one of my bridges.
This is just a mechanism to get it into document.
It's
in the process.
It's really just a timing issue for us, as as the cabinet specifically. We do have projects, especially in the bridge and pavement maintenance categories, that do just because of the nature of those projects, they do tend to pop up unexpectedly sometimes. And when we identify those projects, we identify a funding source to go with them, and we make that funding source available in the KIPTA region. But the issue is currently the way, if that falls under one of those various project categories that's in the TIP right now, there's not a specific threshold. It's more at staff's discretion as to whether it should qualify for an administrative modification or not. And quite honestly, I don't like that either. I mean, in some ways, having a clear-cut threshold, I think, is better.
And we don't like that either, because we're making that decision.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's nice to know if a project is above a certain level, then you got to do an amendment. Or, like I say, in a lot of our other MPOs, we just don't have any threshold at all, just because the nature of these projects is such that they're generally not going to be controversial, no matter how much it costs. If it's a $15 million or a $20 million pavement rehab project, it's generally not going to be controversial, and it may be an emergency repair that we want to move forward with. That being said, like I say, the cabinet's position is that, especially for that category, but in general, we don't like the limits. But if the committee feels that that's necessary, then I do think this is a better process than what we've been doing before. And one other concern that I have is that these numbers could become obsolete rather quickly due to inflation. So I was wondering if a process might be built into this to allow these categories to be adjusted in $500,000 increments based on the rate of inflation that's being assumed for the MTP.
Well, I think on an annual basis, certainly on a 4-year basis, between MTP updates, we'll be reevaluating the whole process, not just by 500,000 increment, but just the entire process.
All right, and that's probably a good approach, but it is something to keep in mind. If we do put limits on these, I don't think we want to just let them sit on the table for years and let them get obsolete.
Just a point of clarification, Tom, you indicated that part of the concern is that at the end of the year you have funds left over and you're trying to get those spent.
Correct.
Speaking from the Indiana side, there are no bid lettings within the last 2 months of the fiscal year. So even if there were leftover funds, we're not even going to have a bid letting within that 60-day window. Does the same thing apply in Kentucky?
What our goal is at the end of the fiscal year is to get the money obligated, not necessarily to get the project to letting. Generally speaking, there's going to be a pretty good lag between the time that we get the money obligated. Sometimes we'll get money obligated for design instead of construction. But we do have money that's getting ready, that's subject to lapse, and we're trying to find projects to just get the money obligated for. And once it's obligated, even though it hasn't been let to construction, it may not be let to construction for some time. That gets us out of having the possibility that the funds would lapse.
Kentucky obligates up until the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, just a clarification coming from the Indiana side. I was just trying to clarify on the Kentucky side how that works.
Right.
To make things real clear, those folks are looking statewide. Where can I put money really quickly? And if they happen to see a little perceived barrier in a little area, it's real easy to not look there and look elsewhere and allocate that money.
Any other comments? All right, so I believe as I was keeping score here, there is a recommendation to add language after reduced crashes to include and/or reduced risk factors. And that would be on page 4 under safety improvements. And is it found anywhere else?
It's also on page 4.
2 places.
Yes, under for projects and programs to be considered for the safety improvements group, the projects and programs. That first bullet point, it would be added after that, the first part of that sentence. Only instead of reduce, it would be reducing.
Yes. Okay. And then there was an offer to add a sub-bullet point under safety transportation improvements to support the Kentucky, Indiana Strategic Highway Safety Plans, but my understanding is those are already incorporated by default, so that becomes a new item.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about that one after all.
All right, so we'll start at the bottom and move our way up. I would entertain a motion to add the language as stated to the safety improvements such that grammatically it would change to reduce crashes and/or reduce risk factors on all public roadways and so forth. Do I have a motion on that? Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Can I, clarification, so the original request for a motion was to approve with the staff recommended changes, which.
What I'm doing here is just asking for an amendment to what the staff is recommending, then we'll move up and do we want to take staff's recommendation and then we want to take the.
Just want to make sure that we're.
All right. So the motion on the table is to add the language as presented. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we have additional language inserted.
I can bring we need to get the 15 million approved.
I can bring this up on TV if you want me to.
We need to get the 15 million.
Okay. All right, so then the next item we would act upon would be changing on page 3, under road and bridge preservation, increasing the threshold from 10 to 15, which is a recommendation of the committee over staff, if I'm correct, and the addition of the 2 TARC items. Do I have a motion to make those subsequent changes?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Any further discussion or question? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Now then, I guess to bring them all together, I'll entertain a motion to approve the entire group categories
And the criteria associated.
and the criteria associated with those. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or comments?
I have a question. Maybe I'm missing the point or something here, but kind of referring to the KYTC guys, are we building a problem here that can bite us as far as funding? I don't know. I'm just bringing that out because as one like to get their funding, I don't want to create a problem. In this area versus the rest of the state, thinking of myself, I'm just asking that. I'm curious.
I think that we could potentially be. I don't think it's very likely that we'll have a significant number of projects that would fall into these categories and exceed these thresholds that we would have concerns with. But I do think it's possible. So like the staff mentioned, there is a trade-off between this committee having approval authority over those projects of the higher cost, even though that's statewide money. It's not the dedicated money that we're specifically referring to. But there is that trade-off between that and taking the public's desires into account and being able to obligate money quickly if we get into a situation where we need to.
Mayor,
So,
over the last 3 years, we have not had a situation where we have had an administrative modification that would incorporate the things that they're talking about that is above these thresholds that would create a problem like that. So I think that the benefits outweigh the risk.
Okay, it was just forcing my thought process here. We don't want to single ourselves out and make funding easier to go somewhere else rather than here, because that's the last thing we want to do. I don't want to.
Well, Mayor, we also don't want to be in a circumstance where they're bringing us a project that exceeds the threshold, but is completely against every other thing that we're doing here.
Exactly, true. Okay.
All right, any further questions or discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor.
I will just say, I do think if we increase the thresholds as mentioned for those other projects, I do think that would tremendously reduce the likelihood that something would bite us. And that is based on input from our other divisions, and it's not based on anything specific to this area, but looking at the statewide projects and the type of projects that they're seeing, they do feel that those increased thresholds would be appropriate.
Okay. I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion, questions, and comments. The natives are sounding restless outside, so we will quickly move on to item 8, Transportation Improvement Program.
Hi, my name is Amanda Deathridge. I'm here to present administrative modifications to our fiscal year 18 to 21 TIP. These are all project changes that are minor and exempt, so we do not need any action today. We have 3 administrative modifications to present to you. Admin mod number 24 and 25 are in your meeting packet, and there was an addendum to your meeting packet today. I don't know if everybody grabbed it. It was on top of the podium. I'll hand them out if you need one. We added 3 new projects to that, KYTC projects to that admin mod. So going back to admin mod 24, that was an urgent one that KYTC needed to process immediately because they had awarded TAP funds to 3 projects. 2 of those were U of L projects. One was a Jeffersontown project. While we were at it, we already did project changes to an NDOT project and a KYTC project on that one. That one's already been sent to the state DOT for inclusion in their STIP. Admin mod 25 was processed on the 4th Thursday in December, which would have been our TPC meeting, but we didn't hold it in December. That included the modification of a description of a J-Town project of the admin mod we had done the month before, 1 NDOT project, and the rest of the projects in admin mod 25 were the reshuffling of all of the Olmsted projects. Louisville Metro has modified the termini of most of those sections and reshuffled some of the funding, and so we felt the best way to reshuffle that was just to remove those projects and add new ones, and so that's the administrative modification that we did that. And then admin mod 26 is that addendum today. We added 3 projects, KYTC projects since the mail out. 5 total were KYTC projects, 8 were NDOT projects, and as a result of Nick's presentation earlier today on the quarterly review process, you guys approved project changes today, so we're going to process those in an admin mod this afternoon. That was 2 Louisville Metro projects, 1 Clarksville project, 1 Floyd County project, and 3 New Albany projects. Again, we don't need any action on these today, but I'll be happy to answer any questions on them. Thank you, guys.
One thing that we're trying to do with administrative modifications, because we're on that subject and have been for the last hour and a half, Amanda sent out a schedule going forward for 2019 on when we would like to have those requests for administrative modifications submitted to us so we can get them out in the mailing to you on a regular basis. So go back and look at that email and kind of use that as a guide, because we'd like to have time for everyone to look at them before the meeting.
Okay. Item number 9, Transportation Policy Committee 2019 Vice Chair.
Yes, the chairman, according to our bylaws, is the highest ranking member of the board, the executive committee. This year it is Mayor Chapman, so he is our chairman for 2019 for TPC. We need to elect the vice chair. We need the nominations from the committee, and we'll elect the vice chair today if it works out. Nominations? No nominations, then perhaps a volunteer. I think that's what happened to you last year.
That's what happened to me last year, yeah.
And there you are.
Can't miss any meetings on something.
Anybody want to make he's a volunteer, so we can take advantage of this by nominating him and or going right to an election, which is what we did to Mr. Beatty.
You did. The train came rolling down the track.
And that's your job to call for the election.
All right. So I believe I saw a motion back here.
Yes, you did.
All right. Motion is to, and I can't read your last name, Keith. I knew the first name. Motion is to elect Keith to serve as vice chair for 2019. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. To hear any opposition discussion, any other volunteers? Toot, 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 the train's a-moving. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations. All right, any other business to come before the committee? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Opposed?